10. The United Nations. A religious dream. The poet Tennyson, while striving earnestly to maintain a Christian perspective, found nonetheless that Darwin's evolutionary theory had made the old certainties difficult for him. Thus, despite certain pious affirmations from time to time, his basic perspective was doubt of God and of God's existence or goodness. He saw, "This earth a stage so gloomed with woe, you all but sicken at the shifting scenes." The play. The one reality of life and man is mutability, change, and decay. On all sides, the eloquent testimony of earth is the relentless ruin of time, the unceasing prevalence of death and decay over life and man, for all things are in perpetual flux. For Tennyson, the central problem is this ever-flowing stream of change. The hills are shadows, and they flow from form to form, and nothing stands. They melt like mists, the solid lands, like clouds they shape themselves and go. In Memoriam 123, 2. Nothing stands, Tennyson said, but something should stand. Man can accept mutability and flux when the ceaseless flow and change has, as its counterbalance, a factor for permanency, eternity, and certainty, an unchanging factor as the agency of control over change. The answer of men to this problem of perpetual flux has, in the main, been twofold. First, either to accept the transcendental and supernatural Creator God as the agency of origin and control, or second, denying God, to see in nature an agency, such as evolution, which man can now control and guide to create human order as the agency of control. In terms of this, the builders of Babel declared, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower." In terms of this, John Dewey, denying God as the answer and ridiculing the quest for certainty from God, offered certainty in and through the Great Society. The quest for certainty is inescapable unless meaning is rejected and suicide is affirmed. The problem has been the source of certainty and control over change, God or man. Tennyson looked for a world state to provide that control, and a world where the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the federation of the world. There are the common sense of most shall hold a fretful realm in awe, and the kindly earth shall slumber, lapped in universal law. Locksley Hall. Tennyson was not being perverse or anti-British in affirming this hope. It was simply a logical necessity. Man needs a source of certainty and an agency of control. If he denies this function to God, he will ascribe it to man and to a man-made order. This order will, like God, be man's source of salvation. It will be a saving order. The Charter of the United Nations, in its preamble, begins by declaring that "We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims." The phrase, "determined to save," is expressive of the high religious resolution of the United Nations. The United Nations is, by its own charter, clearly a humanistic organization, dedicated, as a special report of the Unified Command on the Armistice in Korea, August 7, 1953, stated, to humanitarian principles. We will either fail to understand the UN or to cope with it unless we recognize that it is religious in inspiration and a religious necessity for humanism, for the religion of humanity. First, man needs an agency of certainty and control in order to meet this world of change and decay and give it meaning. And second, man will make of that agency a substitute God. The necessary attributes of the Godhead are inescapable needs to man in order to sustain meaningful life and thought. Wherever there is no theology of God, there will be a theology of the state or of the world superstate. The attributes of God are the inescapable substrata of human existence and thought, the necessary categories of meaning and order. The first and basic requirement of a theology is the unity of the Godhead. A divided or disunited God, or a schizoid God, is useless to man and to himself. The deity, in order to exercise the control which is required of him, and in order to be an assured source of certainty, must be united. He must be one God. The same basic requirements must prevail. The unity of every Godhead is a theological necessity. Accordingly, for the religion of humanity as represented in the United Nations, the unity of mankind, without discrimination or subordination, is a necessity. The central sin becomes not rebellion against God and His law, but everything that hinders the union and peace of the new God, humanity. President Lyndon B. Johnson, in speaking of the quest for peace, declared, "On a worldwide basis, we place much hope in the United Nations. Not sin, but war, poverty, and ignorance, misery and disease are seen by Johnson as man's basic problems, and it is the uprooting of these evils which will make possible the desired world order. We believe the most plausible solution to war is simply for each nation to leave its neighbours in peace. This would free us all to attack these ancient enemies of all mankind that for centuries have warred on man and his hope, poverty and ignorance, misery and disease. If we will join together to destroy them, we will destroy the roots of war. The roots of war, thus, are seen to be poverty and ignorance, misery and disease, not sin. The solution to man's basic problem is thus not the God of Scripture, but statist action against social conditions." Johnson, in his State of the Union address, declared, "We are entering the 3rd century of the pursuits of American Union." This is a curious reading of American history. The War of Independence was fought not in pursuit of union, but to gain freedom from statist invasion and power. But for Johnson, the key concept is union, the closer union of the United States to the central government. And now, in 1965, we begin a new quest for union. We seek the unity of man with the world he has built. This means the Great Society and the welfare state. It means also this growing union, the community of nations, and a new immigration policy, as well as civil rights at home. This idealistic message concluded with a religious doxology. "So it was in the beginning, so it shall always be while God is willing, and we are strong enough to keep the faith." The faith we are to keep is not in God, but in ourselves, in the State of the Union, free, restless, growing, and full of hope. The United Nations Charter, in its preamble, asserts that its purpose is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, and according to Chapter 1, Article 1.3, to gain fundamental freedom for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Such a purpose requires the unity of man and sees disunity and war, a product of disunity, as the greatest evil. Increasingly, in many legislative acts, such as the Rumford Act in California, discrimination with respect to race, colour, or creed is seen as evil and criminal. It divides mankind, and the Godhead must be united. The goal of all humanists, all advocates of the religion of humanity, is the unity and oneness of all men. It's a mistake to see the forces for world unity and government primarily in terms of the United Nations. The United Nations organization is dedicated to a wide variety of projects which recognize no territorial boundaries, community organization and development, migration, the prevention of crime and the treatment of offenders, housing and planning, children, education, money, and a wide variety of other causes. While ostensibly limiting itself to international rather than domestic issues, its definition of what is of international concern is all-inclusive. This has been demonstrated repeatedly, as witness its concern over apartheid and the treatment of people of Indian origin in the Union of South Africa. All the same, the zeal for world unity displayed by various United Nations agencies is clearly surpassed by some national agencies, and especially by private groups, citizens, and by clergymen of the humanistic faith. These persons and agencies religiously dream and work for the great redeeming order, the one world state, the unity of man, believing, like Tennyson, that, in this order, the battle flags of the world will be furled and the whole world lapped in universal law. The 1965 demands for immigration law changes in the United States reflected this hope. The United Nations has asserted that it has long been recognized that migration constitutes a problem requiring international action. In a United Nations population study which calls attention to the overpopulation of Asia, we are told, on the other hand, if emigration were to have any great effects on the trend of population in some of the largest, most densely populated underdeveloped countries like India, China, and Java, it would not only have to equal, but to surpass by a wide margin the highest emigration rates ever experienced in European countries during the era of the great transatlantic movement. Such a fear appears to be entirely out of the question under the conditions that exist in the world today. Within the limits of what is possible, emigration may nevertheless be of some help in relieving the economic pressures due to excessive density of agricultural population and too rapid growth of numbers, particularly the smaller, underdeveloped countries. Its possible effectiveness in favourable circumstances, at least in the short run, is shown by the recent experience of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, of course, is a special case, since its citizens have unrestricted access to the United States, and the cost of their transportation and relocation in that country is minimal. Like most United Nations studies, this raises great questions, but gives only vague answers. Possibilities are considered, such as a major migration from Asia to America, but the possibility appears to be entirely out of the question. A curious statement. It appears to be so, but is it necessarily so? We're reminded of the difference between Europe and Asia. Early in the century, there was one European for every 2 Asians. By the end of the century, this ratio may have become 1 to 4. We are told, with respect to the future of world population, that a new process is about to begin, or has perhaps already started, and the first signs of that socialization of the world which appear on the horizon may be significant in this connection. What is this new process of world socialization which is about to begin with respect to population? There are indications of this in a study of the elements of immigration policy prepared by the UN Department of Social Affairs, Population Division, with help from the International Labour Office, the Food and Agricultural Organization, UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, WHO, World Health Organization, the Division of Economic Stability and Development of the Department of Economic Affairs of the UN, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We are assured in the introduction that no attempt is made to propose solutions for the problems stated. Moreover, The present study is not to be regarded as an argument in favour of immigration or against it. The title indicates the purpose of the paper to provide the elements of immigration policy without specifying the policy. Some very curious elements, however, quickly appear. A point which may count in favour of immigration when the cost of settlement is considered lies in the avoidance of duplication of overhead capital. In the case of transfer of local population to developing areas, the services and housing already provided in the areas of out-migration might be left unutilised or underutilised, thus causing wasteful duplication. In the case of immigration, such waste is avoided since the local population will continue to utilise the services provided for them. Equally, of course, waste could be avoided if, at the same time that the local population was transferred, immigrants were moved in to take the place of the transferred population without undue costs of settlement. Where the receiving country is underdeveloped, however, the provision of general services in the areas of out-migration will often be insufficient to begin with. This is a startling passage, especially when we recognise the legal care and precision of all these documents. Notice that the people or, quote, local population, end quote, as well as the immigrants, do not move. They are moved. The verbs are passive, not active. People are moved from a developed area to developing areas, and other peoples are moved in to avoid waste of the houses and facilities. Both emigrants and immigrants are passive. They are moved. Since these are the elements of immigration policy presented by the United Nations, the contemplated policy is total control by a world state which feels free to reshuffle populations at will. This reshuffling of world populations would not be a new policy. Assyria and Babylon used it, forcibly breaking up various nations and moving them in an effort to internationalize and unify their great empires into a united world order. We are also given a picture in this study of the elements of policy of the transfer of functioning farms to new farmers, the immigrants. A distinction must be made between the settlement of new lands and the placing of new farmers on lands already cultivated. Where agricultural immigration is encouraged as a part of a program for reorganization or diversification of agriculture involving the transfer of lands already under cultivation to the hands of immigrant farmers, the methods of effecting the change need to be planned in such a way as to produce the least possible disruption of agricultural operations, as well as a minimum of social disturbance and hardships. Schemes may have to be devised to enable the population formerly engaged in the discontinued types of agricultural activity to be absorbed in the new forms of agriculture in conjunction with the immigrants. Farmers are to be moved, farms transferred to immigrants, and new types of farming started, all with the population passive. In free migration, successful farmers in a free and profitable situation are not the migrants, but, according to these planners, virtually all plans for agricultural settlements will inevitably call for the immigration of expert farmers fully proficient in their occupation. Does this mean that all plans for world agrarian reform will inevitably call for the forced migration of American farmers, the world's most expert and proficient agriculturalists, to various parts of the world? We are further told that mixed marriages will facilitate resettlement. The children in immigrant families are an extremely important factor in social and cultural integration. The first generation is not easily adapted. It is hard for adults to remake their lives, and learning the language thoroughly is a difficult task for them. The children, on the other hand, adapt themselves much more readily to the new environment and exert a strong influence toward conformity of their parents. It is through the children that the school, that great agent of social and cultural integration, makes its influence felt throughout the immigrant population. Of the institutions assisting integration, we are told, most important are the schools. These are the elements of immigration policy. Do we see any signs of the policy itself taking shape? On October the 2nd, 1964, President Johnson, in Proclamation 3620, declared 1965 to be International Cooperation Year and dedicated it to strengthening world organization and international cooperation. As a major step towards this goal, in 1965, the Kennedy-Johnson Immigration Bill was promoted as the replacement for the McCarran-Walter Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, a summary and codification by McCarran, Walter and others of existing immigration policy. The Kennedy-Johnson Bill, S. 1932, in the Senate, was introduced by Senator Hart of Michigan and in the House by Congressman Seller of New York as H.R. 7700. Senator Storm Thurmond observed that both bills seek to establish immigration as an alien right instead of a privilege, putting foreign interests above our own. Senator Javits of New York has even referred to the bills as being civil rights legislation for the world. It was charged by champions of the Kennedy-Johnson Bill that the McCarran-Walter Act discriminates against Southern Europe, Asia and Africa. The quota system, however, has had not race as much as cultural compatibility in mind. As an editorial stated, it cannot be emphasized too strongly that the ethnic question has nothing to do with racial characteristics. It is based, rather, on cultural compatibility. Generally, existing law favours immigration from nations whose cultures are closest to our Western ideals and traditions. It is also weighted in favour of those whose skills and training can be put to use here. Selection on these bases minimises the problems of assimilation. Others, however, accused defenders of the McCarran-Walter Act of xenophobia and held such laws to be bigoted and stupid. Three central aspects of the Kennedy-Johnson Bill can be briefly cited. First, as Senator Javits stated, it was intended to be civil rights legislation for the world. The idea of an American heritage and existence in separation and distinction from other cultures is implicitly held to be wrong. A world culture requires an open world with respect to immigration, and therefore restrictive immigration to preserve cultural identity is of necessity evil. In an earlier era, free trade was held to be the substitute for immigration. The free flow of goods and ideas resulted in worldwide progress, which brought growth to the backward areas without the necessary movement of peoples. Now, the movement of populations is a right and the visualized means of growth. A world culture requires population movements and blendings and the elimination of differences. The new Godhead, humanity, must be one. It must be united. Second, the bill transfers control of immigration from the legislative to the administrative departments. Not only does the bill create a new pattern of immigration, but it establishes an immigration advisory board with the power to implement the legislation. Third, administrative powers enable the President to bypass the law, overcome quota limitations and, by waiver of existing restrictions, permit entry to persons whose presence is not in the national interest. The principle of selectivity would be bypassed as prejudicial to the immigrant and his quote-unquote rights. In effect, it would be a major step towards a surrender of effective control over immigration. Such a step has already been taken, as in 1963 when the State Department agreed to Castro's demand that he designate 50% of all persons migrating to this country. Immigration changes in the year of international cooperation were a necessary step towards the unity of the Godhead, humanity, under its federal head, the one world state. The basic premise of immigration policy is not economic, but rather the religious goal of unity. These immigration changes, although basic, are being introduced with Fabian strategy, the strategy of the inevitability of gradualism. A second basic requirement of an effective theology is the omnipotence of the Godhead. Sovereignty and creative power must reside in the source of certainty and agency of control, or there will be neither certainty nor control. Accordingly, as the new faith has taken over steadily and Christianity has been bypassed, omnipotence has been transferred from God to the state. The democracy of God was asserted by early champions of the social gospel, even as they began to dream of the omnicompetence of the state. The various national states have become progressively more nearly total in their powers over their citizenry, in their claims over religion and education, and in their messianic pretensions. Meanwhile, these states, like quarrelling gods of the modern Olympus, have taken counsel together towards the creation of a new hierarchy and a world government of gods. The United Nations is the humanistic Mount Olympus and Tower of Babel, a dream of reason whereby man becomes his own god and totally governs the earth and his destiny. The developing omnipotence of the states and of the world order of states can only be undercut as men submit to the total sovereignty of God. A third basic aspect of the Godhead is omniscience. Total sovereignty and total government require total knowledge. How can God govern man totally if he has no knowledge of man's every fibre and thought? Omniscience is a necessary concomitant to total government and even to effectual government. If the mind of man is a free and separate realm and outside God's knowledge and control, outside God's determination, then man's inner life is completely free of God and is a world without any God other than man. It is impossible, therefore, for any God to be God without a control over and in man's mind. Don Bell has described the hateful parallel. Followers of Christ know one thing, though we try to turn our backs to the fact: God knows our every thought, our every action. He knows all about us, past, present, and future. Though he looks no more in the past, which has been erased by the blood, we have an intermediary to plead our transgressions of the present, and he is able to keep his own for all future. The seed within you cannot sin, and he is able to forgive his children. But he is our Creator. We are his slaves, and he knows our very thoughts before we even think them. And we cannot hide from God. I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee, said Job. Shall not God search this out? For he knoweth the secrets of the heart, sang David. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. Hell and destruction are before the Lord. How much more then the hearts of the children of men? Asked Solomon. The Lord told Jeremiah, I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways, and according to the fruit of his doings. And Paul was very definite. For the word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. If we look to Christ Jesus as our Saviour and Redeemer, then we know and accept the truth that we are slaves of Christ and that He knows all and everything about us. This is His right. Now, let's reverse the coin. If we look to state as our keeper, then state has every right to know all there is to know about us. We cannot serve two masters, and if we accept gifts or aid from the state, then we must serve the state by letting the state become the discerner of our very thoughts. We must allow the state to substitute the IBM card for the Book of Life, and we must confess to state all our sins and shortcomings, our strengths and our weaknesses, the thoughts and intents of our heart. We cannot have it two ways. Either we must accept Christ or state as master. We must answer to God or the IBM card. We must have a name written in heaven or a number punched on a card at the data processing center. We can have one of two big brothers, Jesus Christ or IBM. We cannot serve both, else we will hate one. The state seeks to gain this total knowledge of us, first by controlling our education, second by controlling our minds through its program of mental health, and third by controls invading our privacy. The United Nations draft resolution against discrimination in education is designed for the eventual control of all education, quote-unquote public, private, and parochial. The mind of man must be a necessary area of control for any effective God. The choice before man is which God shall he turn himself over to, the state, our world state in its final form, or the God of Scripture. Every God requires worship and sacrifice, and what men sacrifice for and what men sacrifice to is properly their God. It is significant that the modern tithe is to the states in the form of taxes. Again, it is significant that John F. Kennedy's death was seen by some poets as an atoning sacrifice for the New World Order. For Louis Turco, Kennedy was a man, but more. You were an idea dreamt in a sweet hour while the spider slept. David Ignatow made much of the fact that the man is gone on a Friday. For G.S. Fraser, he was an Apollo and a Caesar, and Robert Hazel saw him going to Dallas as a young god without wound to be killed there in this post-Christian era by the old, impotent, sacred emblems of religious awe, of tribal arrogance. For John Tagliabue, Kennedy was an incarnation of democracy, while Barbara Guest wrote that Kennedy lived to be consecrated to Demos. X.J. Kennedy saw him nailed on the cross of a rifle sight. All this is quite natural. The state is the area now of salvation, and the saving state and leader is the world statesman, dedicated, as was Kennedy, not to national independence, but to world interdependence. Significantly, however, the poets saw no cleansing in the blood of this quote-unquote God. According to Barbara Howes, we are stained by its stain. A sovereign God is not under law, he is law, and he is the source of law. The economists of the New World Order do not feel themselves bound by economic laws because, as members of the Godhead, they are themselves the source of law. An economics in which man is a creature and God is creator is an economics of scarcity because man is limited to whatever God makes his portion. An economics resting on the divinity of man and his world order is an economics of abundance because the world state as God is able to create ex nihilo out of nothing. Its basic problem is not supply but distribution. It believes itself to be able to create wealth. It has only to gain control and proceed to the distribution of its abundance. A necessary aspect of the Godhead is its transcendence, whereby the deity, although knowable, is still incomprehensible since he so greatly transcends man. Wherever statism develops, the complexity and divine incomprehensibility of the king, ruler, or head of state is emphasized. This terminology, as George N. Crocker has pointed out, has become the language of state. Robert E. Sherwood in Roosevelt and Hopkins spoke of Roosevelt's incomprehensible power. Eric Sevareid compared L.B. Johnson to Julius Caesar and saw in him a complex nature, while other worshippers have hinted of his incomprehensibility. To the activities of the United Nations, the same inscrutable wisdom is ascribed increasingly. This, then, is a religious faith. Its origin is in the apostasy of Western men from Christianity, and it is the steady creation of another god, a golden calf being steadily fashioned by covenant-breaking man. The United Nations is the product of this religious quest, and its basic source is not primarily in plotting internationalists, but in men who, like Tennyson, have sought to find a certainty and an agency of control in a world where nothing stands, and the very hills are shadows, and they flow from form to form. Man is a religious creature. He will either worship God, or he will make himself a god. And the United Nations is that new god appearing on man's questing horizon. It's easy to point out its absurdities. Thus, a UNO delegate travelling through New Guinea in an area completely backward and primitive and only recently weaned from headhunting is said to have inquired critically why no university had yet been put up. Again, the Institute for Defence Analysis, IDA, can be cited in Information and Strategy Stability. This private agency, which has done millions of dollars worth of peace studies for the government, declared that intelligence gathering is a hostile act which can lead to war. Intelligence, therefore, should be shared on occasion with the Soviets to indicate friendliness and to reassure them that we are peaceful in our intentions. One proposed solution is for the Soviets to be able to demand that a few submarines of their choosing surface and make their positions known. Such things are easily ridiculed, but these religious attitudes are not so easily changed. If men will not find their security in God, they will find it in a world order, and they are more consistent and logical than those who reject both God and the state and are caught then in the futility of sterile protest. The United Nations is a religious dream, and a very logical one. Its basic source is in the inescapably religious nature of man. Order and meaning are a necessity to man, who cannot live by bread alone. The rapid development of free economics in the 19th century gave to man, as he entered the 20th century, a life of remarkable material wealth and promise, but by its secularism, this industrialism left man open to the command of new and demonic religious forces. We can indeed chart the conspiracies and the revolutionary cabals in all this, but we must remember that the alpha and the omega of man's being is his creation in the image of God and his inescapably religious nature. The majority of men are demanding more and more of the state, and their demands are religious demands, demands for salvation. The basic source of the United Nations is this apostate religious hunger of man, and it will not abate until man surrenders himself and his every hope, his every institution and order to the sovereignty of the triune and only true God.